Hello there, everyone, and welcome once again to One Idea Away. You know, on the show, we talk about any myriad of different topics, but a lot of those topics, whether it be on mindfulness or compassion or meaning or connection or purpose, whatever it is that we get into, usually then ends up getting grounded in some form of practices, daily and weekly and even annual type of rituals and practices that help us ingrain new patterns of behavior, that help us ingrain new ways of seeing the world, that help us really tune into our own awareness and expanding our awareness of all the different things that might be occurring for us and occurring inside of our lives. Well, as part of us trying to take on any of these new practices are built on habit. And habit is certainly something that some of us have had a little better go at than others at different times. Some of the science that's out there that'll tell you some of the stats that are out there in terms of how many people actually follow through on their New Year's resolution. I almost don't even want to bring up because it's horrifying. We don't really do all that great in following through on those intentions and embedding those new habits, even if we really are still trying to lose that last 10 pounds. And so interestingly enough, we actually understand more today about what it takes to create real change in our lives than ever before. Neuroscience is kind of peeling back the mystery of what's going on in these biological machines that we happen to be running. And as we understand them more, there's so much more that we can do intentionally that really help us start to integrate what we want to integrate, rewire what we want to rewire. But it does take some very specific approaches. It takes some very, very specific knowledge to do that. So today, you've maybe even in the last couple of episodes have seen that we've been getting a little bit more into some of the neuroscience and some of the biology and a little bit more about our nervous system. And today's no different. We're going to dive in with one of those experts that really can take us deeper in this field. Because again, the more that we understand the way that this thing works, this meat suit that we're walking around in, the more we understand how this works, the more that we really do have that ability to create the possibilities of change and the experience of life that we wish to have. And so with that, I am very, very fortunate to welcome James Garrett with us here today. And he is the founder and CEO of Brain by Design. James Garrett is a brain coach. He's a brain hacker, founder of Brain by Design. He's spoken on stages ranging from Harvard to TEDx, and his work has been featured in the New York Times, FastCompany, Harvard Business Review, as well as many others. He spent years doing research with some of the best psychologists in the world at Columbia, Tufts, as well as in Yale. He's a content creator, course builder. His course on the science of coaching has been rated one of the best courses for coaches, and it's currently certified by the International Coach Federation for continuing coach education credits. He's also built one of the only brain-based positive psychology curriculum in the Middle East and trained thousands of Arab youth in partnership with Queen Rania of Jordan. A rare combination of scientist, trainer, and entrepreneur. In 2019, James launched the Deep Change Project, a big focus of our conversation today, which is a year-long personal journey to discover what's possible at the outer edges of brain hacking and neuroplasticity. And so with that, James, I want to thank you for coming on here, One Idea Away.
Thanks, Luke. So glad to be here.
James, I guess, one of the things that I was curious about, and we've chatted a little bit offline on, is a little bit about the personal journey that has led you to doing what, you're doing today. Brain hacking, I am pretty sure, was not on the GED qualification test of what we should be doing with our lives.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, what was more the personal draw to this field that really kind of fueled your professional pursuits?
Yeah, it's a great question. You dive right in the heart of it. So for me, I grew up in a house that we didn't have a lot of books around the house. I didn't come from a highly educated house necessarily. My dad didn't didn't graduate college, that sort of thing. So it wasn't that I was sort of nurtured in the great minds growing up necessarily, but I fell in love with psychology in college. But what happened earlier than that was I got really fascinated by the brain and the mind, mostly because I was kind of confused by my own mind. And what I mean by that is there's a history of OCD that runs in my family. And when I was about 13, I sort of discovered these kind of weird behaviors I would do. Mm-hmm. And they bothered me, and I was not letting anybody know about them, right?
Yep.
It was so shame came in very quickly, very hiding that very quickly. And so I had this sort of secret, this kind of buried secret that I was like determined to figure out what that was, what was going on. And so in many ways, it sort of spurred a decades long inquiry, I guess, into the brain, into neuroplasticity, and into understanding the puzzle that our brain really is.
Hmm. What was it that, I guess I'm curious, what was it that took you? Because part of what connected, me to your story was not just the work that you're doing today, but the work that also took you to the Middle East. And I'm just curious if you could share a little bit of that journey and some of the work that you were doing in Jordan, and
Yeah.
then how that really kind of set the stage for so much of what you've been creating ever since.
Yeah. Great question. So I was training to become a scientist. So I did a lot of research with really great researchers, Walter Mischel, the delay of gratification marshmallow tests, worked with Walter, and worked with Yale Emotional Intelligence Center, and Nani Ambady, who's Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink is based on a lot of her research. So they were grooming me to become one of them, of course, right? And what I was really not upset about, but sort of conflicted about, was that science seemed to get stuck in the labs.
Mm.
And I was really passionate about getting science out of the labs and into people's lives, because it was, especially in psychology, there's so much that can make a positive difference. So my wife and I, we were married at the time, we were 29, and we decided to go join Peace Corps. So Peace Corps is actually what got us to the Middle East. So we spent 2 years, learning everything we could in the country of Jordan, and built a brain-based curricula. And this was sort of right at the time of the Arab Spring is going on. There's a lot of movement in the region, and a lot of talk about critical thinking, education, and creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship, sort of building. And we built one of the old curricula that was sort of, for the sort of fortuitous, set of events, but we ended up meeting the Queen. She asked us to partner with one of her organizations. We came back, founded our own organization, or nonprofit organization, and went and built that out for 4 more years. So we were there a total of 6 years building out this sort of brain-based positive psychology curricula with high schoolers and college students over there.
Very cool. I'm just curious, what was maybe one of the experiences that you had over those several years that lit the spark that really said, here's something we've got to go so much further on? Because it seems like you came back and all that you've done in creating Brain by Design and everything else, it seems like there was a lot of fires that had been lit.
Yeah, what you realize is when you grasp the fundamentals of how your brain works, and specifically neuroplasticity. So everything we built was kind of based on the idea that the brain can change and grow, right? Yeah. So this is based on Carol Dweck's research with growth mindset and a whole host of other things. When you really get human potential, right, it really like sinks in, it really hits you. What ends up happening is it changes the way you see both yourself and the way you interact with other people. Because what you start realizing is other people aren't this sort of static, two-dimensional kind of in place version of themselves. They're this dynamic, ever-changing, evolving, conscious being, this human that is a work of art, really in progress. And so when you start realizing that, then suddenly life becomes way more interesting. Yeah. Right? The brain is really, there's these contradictory forces, because the brain is really a predictive machine. So what the brain loves to know is what's coming next. That's what makes because the brain is primarily concerned with safety. And so you have that force, which is trying to sort of ossify or sort of crystallize or stereotype another person. And this is especially true with people in our families, right? People we know really well, right? And we sort of kind of reify who they are without really opening up the possibility that they could become anybody they wanted to. Yeah. And so our brains are not really, there's a sort of pull toward that kind of rigidity, where when you look at the neuroplasticity, when you look at the actual science, the science says, oh, no, fundamentally our nature is ever changing.
Mhm.
So if you walk into that ever-changing nature of who we are, then suddenly possibilities open up, hope opens up, and all this sort of excitement, I think, opens up for people.
Very cool. And I can see some of that spark it kind of got lit there because, it really is amazing when we do start to recognize not only within ourselves that there is this possibility of change, but to realize almost the way in which we see the world, the way in which we see other people, and the solid image that we believe that they hold is actually an illusion. That it's actually not quite as real as we thought it was. And there's so much more malleability. There's so much more possibility that's presented there. And the understanding of how do we come to be the way that we are, how might others come to be the way that they are, it really does open up a completely different conversation and perspective of what might be and how we might want to start working with and being very curious about working with ourselves, working with others, working with the world.
It opens up you as a creator.
Say more about that.
As a designer. So this is, and I think this is why it's so powerful. And this is what we'd see with the young people we work with in the Middle East, right? Yeah. You teach these kind of core concepts of growth mindset and neuroplasticity, and suddenly it's like, oh, I can build, I can create, right? One of the highest, I think, kind of ways that we feel like our life has meaning and purpose is our own unique creative contribution in the world. And that's going to be unique for every person. Any of these creativity researchers, when you really look at kind of what they're trying to kind of help us understand, is creativity it lives in the realm of contribution. It lives in the realm of, I think Daniel Pink would call purpose, right? Yeah. That it's a sort of expression of our own, again, unique creative contribution to the world. And so when you start realizing not only does that exist out there, but it exists in here, right? That you can actually become the sort of designer of your own biology, your own brain. In that way, habits take on a sort of different dimension. It's not just about getting to the gym once a week. It's about, no, I could sort of fundamentally alter and improve aspects of my personality or who I show up as in the world in ways that are pretty meaningful.
Absolutely. And I think so let me say some of what I see as the base of what you're talking about. And then I can see how this has been the seeds of what it is that you're specifically doing this year with the Deep Change Project to kind of push the limits on this. But part of what you just described to me is that when we begin to understand our ability as creators, that's also a certain recognition of our own agency, our own ability to be able to create change, to be able to evolve, to be in the driver's seat, as it were. And I know something else that you tie so much of this to is then the effect on self-efficacy, that we really truly believe that we have the ability to then create these types of change, create the experience that we wish to have in life. And so when we do that, now all of a sudden, we really are not looking at what is it that's being done to us in the world, or we being at the effect of anything that's out there. But we recognize that whatever the case may be, we do have this incredible creative potential that lies within us. And that creates a certain, autonomy. It creates certain self-efficacy. It creates certain extraordinary levels of confidence and competence in our ability to take control of our lives in different ways.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up self-efficacy. In some sense, Albert Bandura discovered self-efficacy Albert Bandura, for those who don't know that name, is one of the world's foremost kind of influential psychologists of the 20th century from Stanford. He discovered that self-efficacy is built by small wins. Meaning the formula to get there is not super complicated. What it is these little micro wins, a history of those over time. It's that actually grounds, kind of really solidifies that confidence. So again, whether, I'm thinking of this now in a coaching context, like one of the things that is, we kind of know intuitively, but maybe lose sight of sometimes, is it doesn't take more than a lot of micro wins to actually create a massive amount of momentum and potential and change in somebody's life.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, it's what I think is interesting. And you and I were beginning to chat about this, and then I want to get into specifically the Deep Change Project, is that obviously we are a culture. We would love to have the really quick win, not just the small win. We'd love to create some of the quick shifts that are actually occurring. And unfortunately, it does take a little bit longer for us to really truly ingrain new behavior, new habits, new ways of being and showing up. I think what's being revealed, though, which gives people a different level of confidence in the approach that they can take, is that neuroscience and other fields of research that are coming in are being able to demonstrate and illustrate to us this is how and why it works this way. This is what it will take on average, obviously not identical for every person in the world. And when we actually know that, okay, we do need to stick with it longer, we do need to stick with it roughly 2 months, a little bit longer to ingrain certain things, but we know that it actually works. We know the science behind it. It's not just some arbitrary rule of thumb. Now, all of a sudden, we can approach things, we can set our expectations differently. And I think that's where all of a sudden we really get into just a different level of commitment that we can have to some of the work that we really want to do in our lives. And I think that's one of the extraordinary things that has set up this Deep Change Project that you are right in the middle of this year in 2019, where you are taking the whole year to push the limits of exactly how much can be done. And so I was wondering if maybe let's start there, of maybe you give a little background on the Deep Change Project. Why is it that you decided to undertake this? And let's build from there.
Well, about the sort of year or two before I started the Deep Change Project, I started, meditating. I've been meditating for about 3 years pretty consistently now. And for those who meditate, the power it has. But for me, I was really interested in a number of things. But one of them was meaningfully reducing those OCD symptoms that I was telling about earlier. Mm-hmm. So this is like my kind of, my secret trust me, I kept this really under wraps. The fact that I'm sharing this publicly right now is a lot of emotional work that went before this conversation. What happened is I basically almost eliminated it. Maybe 80% reduction in that kind of pull, that chronic doubt that OCD is. And so, this surprised me to an extent, because it's like, wow, that's a gnarly thing to overcome with 10 minutes of meditation every day with my Headspace app, which is basically what it amounted to. Yeah. And so I was like, well, what else is possible? Right. And so again, when you start looking at kind of meaningful change over time, you start looking at, I'm thinking of Richie Davidson's research and his and Daniel Goleman's recent book, Altered Traits, and some of the kind of more, the bigger hypotheses out there right now based on the best research is that not only can we change a little bit, we could probably change a lot. And again, the best research on this is meditators, because they're in like mental training for hours a day, the really serious ones, for long periods of time. Yeah. So I started wondering, well, okay, you've got these kind of converging elements. One is neuroscience is maturing at a rate that's just, never been seen before. Another one is neurotech. Mm-hmm. Or brain tech, which is as a kind of area is exploding. It's still way under the radar. People really don't know about it, but within the next 3 to 5 years, it'll be everywhere. Yeah. So these are potential technologies that can maybe accelerate that change process. In fact, I'm using my first piece of brain stimulation with Halo Neuroscience, which is transcranial direct stimulation. They call it neuropriming, which basically is trying to help. Their claim is that it helps you, learn faster. And so I'm using it to kind of accelerate my learning process. So you've got these technologies that are kind of budding, that are actually maybe pushing the needle as well. And then you've got personalized data, big data. You have these capacities. I'm wearing my Aura ring, which is constantly tracking all my body, all my kind of main, vitals of my body. And they're all converging all at the same time. And so it's a sense of brain hacking or getting in the driver's seat for real on this machine is finally possible. And again, the way I think of it is the brain is this really powerful machine. If you think of an airplane, okay, we all turn right when we get on an airplane, right? I want you to imagine in your mind's eye going left, sitting at the cockpit as if you're the pilot. And of course, what do you see in front of you? This complex, panels, buttons, levers, all sorts of stuff that looks like Greek to you because you're not a pilot. But the only difference between you and a pilot is that the pilot went through training. The end, right? And so if you were to try to fly the plane, you might be able to get it to back out on the tarmac. Maybe you could get it to putter around, but you're not actually accessing its potential, its ability to do what it's meant to do, which is fly, without proper training. And so in a sense, what we've missed collectively is brain training. The brain doesn't come with the user's manual. It's this incredibly powerful machine, but it doesn't come with a user's manual, and it hasn't. And so what's needed, and what again was missing for most of us, is we've never been trained how to fly this thing to access its deeper potential. And so I was thinking, okay, we know all this stuff. We know neuroplasticity is the real deal. What's actually possible? How far can we push this? How much faster maybe can we change than these lifelong meditators? What does all this mean? How do you actually, so what I'm doing is I'm walking into this kind of guinea pig role in a sense, and I'm trying to fundamentally rewire my brain in 2019 in very particular ways. And I'm measuring this all along the way. I've done MRI scans, I've done QEEGs, I've done all sorts of different stuff to kind of monitor, I've measured my telomeres. I've done all sorts of crazy stuff trying to track the biology and brain of what I'm doing. But in some sense, I've figured I can't do this on anybody else but myself. If it's gonna it's really an experiment of one.
Yeah.
It's a sort of life experiment. I'm not going to call it a scientific experiment because there's too many variables all at the same time, but it's certainly a life experiment of one. And I think this is what people want. They want to know, okay, so I get all the science that's really interesting. How do I do it in my life? How do I apply it? What does it mean? How do I really master habits? When you really get down to it, what do people care about? They want to be healthier. They want their relationships to be better. They want to be happier. They want these sort of core needs we have as humans. And so how does the science help me get those things in my life? And so that's really what I'm trying to work through this year.
I think it blends in a couple of different things. And we talk from time to time on the show of that we've got two different paths that tend to emerge. Part of it is the conversation around really understanding who it is that we are, but part of understanding who it is that we are is the second path, which is what are we? And I think that's part of what you're really beginning to blend together here is that we do need to understand what we are, meaning how is it that we literally work? What is it that our brains are doing? What are the reactions and the patterning and the conditioning in our nervous systems? We need to understand that because there are parts of us that have evolved and been developed from a more primitive state. And so it has very important literally life-saving type of function, but that doesn't always help us in today's life and in today's society. And so you said it before that the brain is obsessed with safety. It's obsessed with survival. That's really where it tends to focus. And I've heard you say something else, and I just wanted you to say more because this is where we start to translate it into, impacting us on the day in and day out type basis, is that our brains are much more concerned with what we do than who we are. I was wondering if you could share a bit more on that, because I think that's where the more we begin to understand some of the patterns that we have and some of the things that may be unhealthy patterns that we have, but recognizing that this is just part of the way the brain is developed to survive, and it really isn't concerned about who we actually are, helps maybe people understand this and maybe not take it so personally, which allows that objectivity, which creates more space for change.
Yeah, the brain is, it's sort of impartial in an interesting way, meaning it doesn't care who you are. It only cares what you do. And the first time I heard that idea was Daniel Coyle in The Talent Code, the book, The Talent Code, which is all about myelin sheath and how to build skill. But it's a fascinating idea because your brain is a much more objective party in this whole equation than you might suspect. So another way of saying this is your brain is another way of, Tom Bilyeu mentioned this phrase, which I really love. He said, your body's the ultimate adaptation machine, right? Mm-hmm. It's the ultimate adaptation machine. So if you start doing something every day, we think of this as a habit, right? Over time, your brain will start believing it's supposed to do that. So actually, physically what happens, I'll give you a little example. About a year or two ago, I started eating, my wife started buying these Panamanian dark chocolate, these really like eco-friendly, delicious varieties, that have a little bit of, I'm not a chocolate connoisseur, but I think those who are would be like, oh yeah, that has these, hints of this and this, but it's like one of those kind of delicious, things. And it became like a staple in our pantry, right? And so no matter who was in the grocery store, I'd buy them, she'd buy them, whatever. It just became this thing. And every night I just started eating a row of chocolate, a row. And so, 10 p.m., our daughter's in bed, kind of just doing the wind down routine. And suddenly I get this like craving to go to the pantry, whether or not I was in the pantry. And so here's the thing, right? You've got neurons that are they're recognized, you call them chocolate neurons, neurons look like trees. So they got these branches, right? Got your chocolate neurons and you've got your timing neurons, ones who are keeping track of time. And eventually, if those two things happen together, 10 p.m. and chocolate, the actual physical neurons will connect biologically in the brain. They'll actually start talking to each other and physically connect. So again, once 10 p.m. hits, and those neurons start firing, it's time for bed. Guess what they're connected to?
Yeah.
A chocolate craving. And so all habits, the brain is a pairer. It's looking at the world, all this chaotic information coming at it, and your brain is a master at it as a pattern detector. Yeah. The ultimate pattern detector. And really what it's trying to do is pair things together and say, oh, these two things are supposed to go together. Mm-hmm. That's the elemental way that it learns. And so it doesn't care if that habit is good or bad for you. That's when it gets really objective. So if the habit is, again, binge watching Netflix at night at that same time or whatever it is, doesn't matter. Or if it's actually doing a wind down routine, meditation and taking a warm shower, something that actually, gets you to sleep better. Yeah. Literally your brain doesn't care what the habit is, as long as it knows what to do. And so in a sense, good habits, bad habits, they're kind of the same to the brain. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of finding the bad ones and maybe swapping them for the good ones. Yeah.
Sure. And I mean, part of what you describe, I mean, there's a consistency factor, certainly, that's there. And I've heard you certainly describe this before of consistency is one of those key elements of forming new habits. Yeah. It's something that, for so many, you think about the different patterns that you may have during a day, and you may not even fully recognize how many of them there are because they become so routine. And the reason why they become routine is that our brains don't want to use energy, right? They just want to be running in the background. Hell, we've already figured that out. Let's not expend any energy on it. Just keep doing those in the background. And you don't realize that, when you come home from work, do you open the bottle of wine? When you pull open your phone for a notification, has a 45 minutes passed by checking all the email, all the social feeds, Twitter, news, and everything else. It's any number of these ingrained little patterns that we have, and we don't realize, exactly as you said, it's the brain just saying, oh, here's a pattern. Let's connect that pattern and keep it together. And then we don't have to think about it. And you know that because when you flip through your phone 45 minutes later, you hardly know what you've been doing for the last 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. So it's that automatic. The piece that I'd love for you then to go into is, how are you, we talk about consistency. That was one of the elements of forming new patterns. I know there's other elements like intensity and things like that as well. I'm curious actually really about this and how this all comes together. I'm curious about, why did you choose the specific areas of focus that you have for this Year of the Deep Change project? So why these specific areas that you choose to focus on, and then how are you applying this specifically to really create the change in those areas?
So I started with stress reduction. So I think of it almost like a model from moving from a 1.0 version of myself to a 2.0 version of myself. It's like an upgrade, a brain upgrade. And so the first 2 months were from stress to mindfulness. It's really kind of a moving from a maybe reactive or sort of, I don't think at the time, well, actually, now that I look back at it, I had a lot on my plate right before I started this. So I was a little bit stressed. But I know that stress, so for me, stress is a foundation, right? If you can dial down stress and you can increase mindfulness, if you can kind of get that right in the beginning, that's the foundation for everything else. Change doesn't really happen in stressed bodies.
Yeah.
Learning doesn't really happen in stressed brains. It's too expensive an activity to run. Neuroplasticity is just too costly to do. So another way of saying that is, and I interviewed Lisa Feldman Barrett on my podcast a long time ago, and she's one of the world leaders in emotion. What makes emotion? And one of the things interesting, these things that she said was, we basically designed a society in which everything is working against our wellness, happiness, and learning.
Yeah.
And the big, big one on that is we're running too fast, too hard, too stressed. We have too much on our plates, bottom line. And so until we sort of take that seriously and actually dial that down, and again, there's really good research on this. You can do this. Part of it's a head game, right? Looking at things as a challenge instead of a threat. That's been shown to increase length of our telomeres and all sorts of positive things. But the other part is straight up dropping some of the things that we're taking on because we're just too overstretched. Humans are not machines. We're biological organisms that need restoration and recharging. So I'd started with that. And the way that I'm doing this is I have a habit stack every 2 months. So I do 3 new habits every month. For me, the first 3 were meditation, exercise, and reading. This is my morning routines, REM. And exercise and meditation are the 2 things that have been shown to show the biggest reductions in stress. So I wanted to start there, and reading just always puts me in a reflective, calm state. So I started there. I moved to focus and flow. And for me, this is about taking breaks during the middle of my day.
Okay.
And so for me, the habits were taking an afternoon nap, 20 minutes, 27 minutes if you want to be really specific, because it takes 7 minutes to fall asleep. Exercise again. So my morning exercise is usually yoga. My afternoon exercise is more vigorous weights or running. And guitar. So I'm learning guitar. So these are 20-minute breaks that I take in the afternoon between my sprints, between my kind of, hour to 2 hour long kind of deep dives. And part of the reason a sprint break model works so well in terms of how our brains work is that your brain can't really focus for more than about 90 minutes. Otherwise, and you'll notice this, you'll start feeling distractible or distracted. And so in a sense that the getting focus right was about managing my energy better and not trying to just cram more stuff in my day.
Okay, that makes sense, because that's what I was going to ask you, because it's interesting to hear you describe the kind of the second layer as being focus, and then talk about where you're taking the breaks, right? So but what you're really describing is that energy efficiency and energy management, so that you're looking throughout the course of the day that when you are where you are, you're really truly focused. You dive in from that type of perspective, and what are you doing to allow that to occur? Would that be a fair way to say it?
Yes. Having a full mental battery. So your brain is just like your cell phone battery. And if you're not recharging it periodically throughout the day, you're going to run out. Right. So psychologists have thought of this like willpower. Roy Baumeister and others think of this as willpower or ego depletion. But the bottom line is your cell phone's like your brain's like your battery. And if you're not managing that energy source, you're going to run out. And if you do run out, bad things start happening. You start surfing social media, you start getting irritable, you start, you get really unfocused. You just literally don't have the juice. And so, yeah, I think of a full battery as like a precondition for flow.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm managing energy in order to, when I'm on, I'm 100% on.
So then what are the next several periods that you're going through, the next several layers and stages that you're going through over the Deep Change Project?
So May and June were about joy and positivity, and moving from like a negativity bias, which our brains naturally have, to a positivity bias. The habits were gratitude journal. So gratitude is just this awesome, amazing thing. An act of kindness. So kindness has been shown again and again to boost our own happiness levels. And no news. I dropped news. So that was because of the inflow of negativity that news is. And I allowed myself to look on the weekends. It's 5 days a week that I don't look. So I'm not completely disconnected. But what I find is even on the weekends, I'll glance at it maybe once, and I'm kind of like, I've been away from it long enough, and I'm kind of like, ooh.
Yeah.
I don't really like it as much anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas I used to be kind of like I'd follow everything.
Yeah.
And now I'm doing creativity, and this one's kind of fun. So I realized that if I do a habit stack that takes an hour, I'm gonna like overwhelm myself, right? So my habits now are a little bit more mini, where I've got my foundations at the beginning. Now I do what I call theta time.
Okay.
And theta time is I take 10 minutes when I wake up, and I just lay there in a kind of half asleep, half awake state. Having asked myself a specific question, like, what am I going to do for this project, or what, so, and I'm just letting my mind basically brainstorm in that altered state of consciousness.
Yeah.
In a theta wave state. Super powerful, way more powerful than I expected. So I do theta time. I do a creativity journal as well. Okay. So I actually write down every time I have an idea. I always write it down, which creativity is cumulative. Turns out that it's not, you don't have these fully formed insights. So you have to write down everything, and then it grows as this kind of growing iterative thing. And the third thing is, let me think, theta time, creativity journal. And I dropped, I'm losing it. 8 to 8. It's the 8 to 8 rule. So I don't check social media or email after 8 p.m. or before 8 a.m. And the reason is because those are when you're most often in theta. Yeah. And so theta is, again, is a high theta, low alpha is this kind of sweet spot for creativity. Basically think of it this way, like those are the moments when your mind is working a little bit slower and it's more flexible, playful, and creative. And so when you're interrupting it with highly demanding, attention-soaking activity, like looking at your phone, you're basically cutting off your creative capacities. This happens especially in the morning when we check our phones first thing.
Absolutely. So it's interesting because, and just real quickly, what were the remaining two areas? Because you're doing something every 60 days.
Yeah. So fearlessness is
That's
September and October. So I'm really excited about this one, and also, of course, a little bit nervous because I'm going to be doing some kind of crazy stuff. I'm really interested in kind of erasing social fear. Okay. Because I don't think it's that helpful. Fear is probably the biggest thing that holds us back, and it's about our safety. Except that most of us are pretty safe. Yeah. And so, and then November, December about connection and other orientation instead of being self-focused, being other focused.
So it sounds like what I heard in the way that you've stacked this is that in that first period, the first 2 months, focusing on from stress to mindfulness, like you said, creates this foundation. Yeah. The focus was also about the recharge your battery, the way in which you were managing your energy. And then from that point forward, even though specifically the kind of the joy and positivity was meant to counteract our negativity bias, you've chosen each one very intentionally to work on your own psychology. But it sounds like the latter half of the year is also a bit reflective of some of your own values and some of your own interests. And that's where I think this is very interesting in what you are beginning to show and being able to demonstrate. And let's see where all of this goes for you over the course of this year. We'll have to have this chat in the early part of 2020, right?
Yep.
Is for each individual to recognize there are certain things that we need to do to support ourselves as human beings in the way that we work, and to get our minds clear, to get ourselves more centered, more calm, so that we can undertake some of the type of change that we want to undertake. And there's certain patterns and certain habits that are going to support pretty much any of us to be able to do that. But then beyond that, for us to get clear on what it is that we value, what it is that matters to us, where it is that we choose to grow. And that's where our sense of energy, that's where our sense of creativity really gets to come in, of what am I creating with my life? And you're demonstrating exactly that through this whole project and process. And hopefully the science is going to be right there behind it.
Yeah, that's right. So it's sort of like a, think of you, try to imagine yourself at your most ideal, your best. What would a 2.0 version of you actually look like? Would it be more courage? What are the traits you want to embody?
Yeah.
And allow yourself to sort of get inspired by that version of you, that future version of you.
Yeah.
And then rewind the clock and say, not only is that possible, right? Neuroplasticity, the problem with potential is we lose sight of what I think of as future potential, right? That it's the potential occurs, it unfolds over time. You know, it's not that it's this idea, right? That, you know, there's this obviously kind of old and erroneous notion that we only use 10% of our brains, right? This, of course, not true. We use all of our brains, but what we don't realize is we don't use our full brain's capacity. You know, when you start looking even at something like myelination, which is white matter, the stuff that insulates our neurons, right? Of an uninsulated or poorly insulated neuron fires at about 2 miles an hour. A fully insulated neuron, which can get up to 50 layers plus deep, fires at over 200 miles an hour. So if you just look at the math, that's a 100-fold increase. And then it gets better. The refractory period, or how long it takes, how many times it can fire per second, right? How long it takes to wind back up and then fire again, can get 30 times faster.
Wow.
So again, Daniel Siegel and others have argued this. You do the math, and that's a 3,000-fold difference. 100 times 30, right? 3,000 times more raw processing power in a single neuron from that's the range, right? And so again, you think of, okay, what is possible? What is my deep potential as a human? And how do I access that and become that person over time? It's simply a matter of designing that unique path, and it's going to be unique for everyone, as you've just said, right?
Yeah.
And then going out and doing it, doing the daily work to actually become that new version of yourself.
I think what, you describe it as the process can begin very much with the intentional habits that we're forming, the intentional behaviors that we're creating, and how we celebrate and look for a lot of those small wins, because that's part of what begins to encourage and champion us along. And what we don't necessarily feel at the outset, but now we're able to demonstrate over and over and over again with tremendous evidence and proof, is that there is such an exponential quality to what it is that we're doing, so that the 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8 and 16 and 32 and so on. And we've got this beautiful exponential pattern that begins to occur because of exactly what you're describing. Our brains are getting faster. They're firing more, they're recovering more quickly. They can literally have more ideas as this starts to pop and build on itself even more. And the more, why I want to highlight so much of this is the more that we understand this, the more we can set our expectations and commit to what it takes to create the change. Whereas, prior to some of the research that's come out in the last decade or so, there still was a little bit of this magic of, why does it work over there and not work over there? It's why I think there was so much interest, and I'm just kind of curious even for your own perspective on this. I think it's why there was so much interest in people creating state change, meaning temporary states that allowed us to feel a certain way or be a certain way, but that never actually translated to full trait change or innate qualities that are within us. And to me, it's the science that's being shown now that actually is and you even referenced altered traits that Dan Siegel is part of and everything else, where we actually are showing that no, it actually is possible to create trait change and not just the temporary change that most people have sought to this point.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the big game, is trait change is the new conversation.
Yeah.
What does that look like? And again, most of this has been studied in meditators, lifelong meditators.
Right.
But for the rest of us who aren't monks, how do we do it?
Yeah.
Which for me is like the driving question of the Deep Change Project.
Yeah. So let me ask you, as we kind of come around full circle, begin to wrap this up, you've got this extraordinary Deep Change Project that you've got going on right now. It touches so many of the things that or I should say builds on so many of the things that you've undertaken to this point. I guess I'm just curious for you of where do you hope this leads? And I don't mean that just professionally in terms of outcomes for you, but I mean, what's the real impact that you hope to leave from doing this work?
I hope that people can see and embody their own true potential. You know, I think we grossly underestimate how powerful we actually are. Yeah. You mentioned agency in the beginning, right? Yeah. This is what makes us truly human, right? It's the fact that we can direct our attention. You know, William James said, my experience is what I agree to attend to. My experience, my subjective experience, my life, right? The inner world of my experience is what I agree to attend to. Animals can't do that. Yeah. The way we can, right? This is part of the power of being human. And so when you, and what happens is attention is like the gatekeeper of neuroplasticity. So when you open that gate wide and you start, lasering it toward areas of your life that you really care about, suddenly you have accelerated neuroplasticity in those areas, and you become, again, the designer of your own self, right? I have to say this. I got the MRI. So I wanted to get this MRI. I got the QEEG and all of the other stuff earlier on in the project, but I only recently got the full brain scan because they were super expensive. And I just found this clinic who said they would do it for me without cost. So I was like, well, done. But I'm sitting there staring at a screen at my own brain for the first time. Mm. And it was almost for me, I literally was like breathtaking. My breath was just, I couldn't, because here I am, a mind looking at my brain from which my mind is arising. I mean, the layers of and there it was. And then suddenly I'm like, that's what I'm trying. That's my canvas, right? That's my work of art. That's what I'm trying to shape and remold and actually change in ways that are more true to my values, to who I want to be in the world. I don't want to show up as a scared, timid, kind of diminished, ashamed version of myself, which many times I've shown up that way. I want to show up as a courageous, present, loving, kind, and fully vital human, which I know I can also show up as at times. But I want those to become habits, ways of being, actual traits.
James, I love that. I was going to wrap us up, but there's just one more thing that I got to bring up because I'm curious now of just your reaction in hearing this. There's one other thing that I see in your work that is sort of something I'm going to be watching of how does this sort of work begin to ripple and waterfall out, is that if we move more and more in this direction, part of what must occur is that for that attention to be more at our disposal, that also means that our stress, as you have described, has been lessened so that we can also be much more mindful in what we do. And as we do that, we move more and more out of our base survival type instincts. When we do that, it means the ability for us to connect socially, for us to understand one another, for us to hear one another, for us to show up as who we are And in understanding how we've created that for ourselves, we understand the path that somebody else is either on or can be on. It creates a very different level of human understanding. And for me, that's where certain properties of compassion and understanding really begin to emerge at a whole other level. And I'm just curious, hearing that kind of reflected back, that may or may not be one of the intentions that you have. But I'm just kind of curious your reaction to hearing that perspective of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, meaning emerges in community. Purpose. Our lives feel purposeful, meaningful, fulfilled, rich when we're contributing who we are, who we're showing up as, or what we're doing, our work or whatever, with other humans or with the planet, right? Yeah. And so I love that you brought this up, because yes, this is the sort of paradox of self-work, is that it's other work at the same time. Yeah. These false binaries, these false choices, like, oh, I'm being so selfish because I'm trying to do all this self-improvement and whatever else. We know that positive emotion is contagious. You brought up polyvagal theory and the way that we resonate with each other, right? And there's Barbara Fredrickson and positivity resonance and all this stuff, which it just shown that, like, look, if you show up, if you're doing the hard work, you start realizing, oh, there is no me and other. We're actually so deeply connected that it's all the same. Me working on myself is equivalent to me working on us. Right? And so I do think and this is especially true in the West, right? I do think we get caught in these sort of isolating paradigms where we keep thinking of ourselves as these atomistic kind of things that we walk around each other. We don't have anything to do with each other, which is just kind of nonsense, right? We're so deeply knit and connected to each other on every level of our biology that when we do this type of work, it's a natural outgrowth to make a positive impact in any domain of your life, whether it's your family or your YouTube channel, or whether it's a book you're writing or whatever.
Outstanding. James, I want to thank you for just being here for on One Idea Way. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. And I can say to you, I can promise to everybody that's tuning into us, we're going to have the follow-up conversation to this in whatever 8 or 9 months. And let's talk about what's unfolded, what you found, and just see where the year has taken you and what this change has offered within your life. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Luke. Appreciate it.
For everybody, I think just maybe a couple of quick things. Number one is definitely check out Brain by Design. Check out James Garrett's work. See all the incredible things that he is up to, and just certainly follow along to everything that is developing. One of the other questions that was posed of, what do you look like as the 2.0 version of yourself? Start to consider what images start to pop up as you ponder it. What are the qualities that you start to embody? What is it that is the way that you're now starting to show up to life? How is it that you handle certain challenges and stresses within your life when you're at your 2.0 self? And start to get a feeling for what those qualities are, and then start to look at what are some of the habits, the disciplines, and the practices that can help those qualities not just become emergent in you from a state standpoint where you occasionally touch it, but how they can actually become very much the nature of who you are, the traits that you have. And so I want to thank you as always for tuning in to One Idea Away. And until next time, continue to enjoy the journey. Check out IPEC's coach training program at ipeccoaching.com/OIA. And of course, to find out about all the conversations, events, gatherings, all the things that we've got upcoming, then head on over to oneideaaway.com/community. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have, please do us the favor of subscribing, reviewing the show, as well as sharing insights or comments that stood out for you in this episode.